on some forms of literature. Essay by Schopenhauer. Arthur Schopenhauer. In the drama, which is the most perfect reflection of human existence, there are 3 stages in the presentation of the subject, with a corresponding variety in the design and scope of the piece. At the first, which is also the most common stage, the drama is never anything more than merely interesting. The persons gain our attention by following their own aims, which resemble ours. The action advances by means of intrigue and the play of character and incident, while wit and raillery season the whole. At the second stage, the drama becomes sentimental. Sympathy is roused with the hero and, indirectly, with ourselves. The action takes a pathetic turn, but the end is peaceful and satisfactory. The climax is reached with the third stage, which is the most difficult. There the drama aims at being tragic. We are brought face to face with great suffering and the storm and stress of existence, and the outcome of it is to show the vanity of all human effort. Deeply moved, we are either directly prompted to disengage our will from the struggle of life, or else a chord is struck in us which echoes a similar feeling. The beginning, it is said, is always difficult. In the drama it is just the contrary, for these the difficulty always lies in the end. This is proved by countless plays which promise very well for the first act or two, and then become muddled, stick or falter, notoriously so in the fourth act, and finally conclude in a way that is either forced or unsatisfactory or else long foreseen by everyone. Sometimes too the end is positively revolting, as in Lessing's Emilia Galati, which sends the spectators home in a temper. This difficulty in regard to the end of a play arises partly because it is everywhere easier to get things into a tangle than to get them out again, partly also because at the beginning we give the author carte blanche to do as he likes, but, at the end, make certain definite demands upon him. Thus we ask for a conclusion that shall be either quite happy or else quite tragic, whereas human affairs do not easily take so decided a turn, and then we expect that it shall be natural, fit and proper, unlabored, and at the same time foreseen by no one. These remarks are also applicable to an epic and to a novel, but the more compact nature of the drama makes the difficulty plainer by increasing it. E nihilo nihil fit. That nothing can come from nothing is a maxim true in fine art as elsewhere. In composing an historical picture, a good artist will use living men as a model, and take the groundwork of the faces from life, and then proceed to idealize them in point of beauty or expression. A similar method, I fancy, is adopted by good novelists. In drawing a character they take a general outline of it from some real person of their acquaintance, and then idealize and complete it to suit their purpose. A novel will be of a high and noble order, the more it represents of inner, and the less it represents of outer, life, and the ratio between the two will supply a means of judging any novel, of whatever kind, from Tristram Shandy down to the crudest and most sensational tale of knight or robber. Tristram Shandy has indeed as good as no action at all, and there is not much in La Nouvelle Heloise and Wilhelm Meister. Even Don Quixote has relatively little, and what there is, very unimportant and introduced merely for the sake of fun. And these 4 are the best of all existing novels. Consider, further, the wonderful romances of Jean Paul, and how much inner life is shown on the narrowest basis of actual event. Even in Walter Scott's novels there is a great preponderance of inner over outer life, and incident is never brought in except for the purpose of giving play to thought and emotion, whereas in bad novels incident is there on its own account. Skill consists in setting the inner life in motion with the smallest possible array of circumstance, for it is this inner life that really excites our interest. The business of the novelist is not to relate great events, but to make small ones interesting. History, which I like to think of as the contrary of poetry, Greek, isterumenon, pipoimenon, having been inquired into, having been done, is for time what geography is for space, and it is no more to be called a science in any strict sense of the word, than is geography, because it does not deal with universal truths, but only with particular details. History has always been the favorite study of those who wish to learn something, without having to face the effort demanded by any branch of real knowledge, which taxes the intelligence. In our time history is a favorite pursuit, as witness the numerous books upon the subject which appear every year. If the reader cannot help thinking with me, that history is merely the constant recurrence of similar things, just as in a kaleidoscope the same bits of glass are represented, but in different combinations, he will not be able to share all this lively interest. Nor, however, will he censure it. But there is a ridiculous and absurd claim, made by many people, to regard history as a part of philosophy, nay, as philosophy itself. They imagine that history can take its place. The preference shown for history by the greater public in all ages may be illustrated by the kind of conversation which is so much in vogue everywhere in society. It generally consists in one person relating something and then another person relating something else, so that in this way everyone is sure of receiving attention. Both here and in the case of history it is plain that the mind is occupied with particular details. But as in science, so also in every worthy conversation, the mind rises to the consideration of some general truth. This objection does not, however, deprive history of its value. Human life is short and fleeting, and many millions of individuals share in it, who are swallowed by that monster of oblivion which is waiting for them with ever-open jaws. It is thus a very thankworthy task to try to rescue something, the memory of interesting and important events, or the leading features and personages of some epoch, from the general shipwreck of the world. From another point of view, we might look upon history as the sequel to zoology, for while with all other animals it is enough to observe the species, with man individuals, and therefore individual events have to be studied, because every man possesses a character as an individual. And since individuals and events are without number or end, an essential imperfection attaches to history. In the study of it, all that a man learns never contributes to lessen that which he has still to learn. With any real science, a perfection of knowledge is, at any rate, conceivable. When we gain access to the histories of China and of India, the endlessness of the subject matter will reveal to us the defects in the study, and force our historians to see that the object of science is to recognize the many in the one, to perceive the rules in any given example, and to apply to the life of nations a knowledge of mankind, not to go on counting up facts ad infinitum. There are two kinds of history, the history of politics and the history of literature and art. The one is the history of the will, the other, that of the intellect. The first is a tale of woe, even of terror. It is a record of agony, struggle, fraud, and horrible murder en masse. The second is everywhere pleasing and serene, like the intellect when left to itself, even though its path be one of error. Its chief branch is the history of philosophy. This is, in fact, its fundamental base, and the notes of it are heard even in the other kind of history. These deep tones guide the formation of opinion, and opinion rules the world. Hence philosophy, rightly understood, is a material force of the most powerful kind, though very slow in its working. The philosophy of a period is thus the fundamental base of its history. The newspaper is the second hand in the clock of history, and it is not only made of baser metal than those which point to the minute and the hour, but it seldom goes right. The so-called leading article is the chorus to the drama of passing events. Exaggeration of every kind is as essential to journalism as it is to the dramatic art, for the object of journalism is to make events go as far as possible. Thus it is that all journalists are, in the very nature of their calling, alarmists, and this is their way of giving interest to what they write. Herein they are like little dogs. If anything stirs, they immediately set up a shrill bark. Therefore, let us carefully regulate the attention to be paid to this trumpet of danger, so that it may not disturb our digestion. Let us recognize that a newspaper is at best but a magnifying glass, and very often merely a shadow on the wall. The pen is to thought what the stick is to walking. But you walk most easily when you have no stick, and you think with the greatest perfection when you have no pen in your hand. It is only when a man begins to be old that he likes to use a stick and is glad to take up his pen. When an hypothesis has once come to birth in the mind or gained a footing there, it leads a life so far comparable with the life of an organism, as that it assimilates matter from the outer world only when it is like in kind with it and beneficial, and when, contrarily, such matter is not like in kind but hurtful, the hypothesis, equally with the organism, throws it off or, if forced to take it, gets rid of it again entire. To gain immortality an author must possess so many excellences that while it will not be easy to find anyone to understand and appreciate them all, there will be men in every age who are able to recognize and value some of them. In this way the credit of his book will be maintained throughout the long course of centuries, in spite of the fact that human interests are always changing. An author like this, who has a claim to the continuance of his life even with posterity, can only be a man who, over the wide earth, will seek his like in vain, and offer a palpable contrast with everyone else in virtue of his unmistakable distinction. Nay more, were he, like the wandering Jew, to live through several generations, he would still remain in the same superior position. If this were not so, it would be difficult to see why his thoughts should not perish like those of other men. Metaphors and similes are of great value, in so far as they explain an unknown relation by a known one. Even the more detailed simile which grows into a parable or an allegory, is nothing more than the exhibition of some relation in its simplest, most visible and palpable form. The growth of ideas rests, at bottom, upon similes, because ideas arise by a process of combining the similarities and neglecting the differences between things. Further, intelligence, in the strict sense of the word, ultimately consists in a seizing of relations, and a clear and pure grasp of relations is all the more often attained when the comparison is made between cases that lie wide apart from one another, and between things of quite different nature. As long as a relation is known to me as existing only in a single case, I have but an individual idea of it, in other words only an intuitive knowledge of it. But as soon as I see the same relation in two different cases, I have a general idea of its whole nature, and this is a deeper and more perfect knowledge. Since, then, similes and metaphors are such a powerful engine of knowledge, it is a sign of great intelligence in a writer if his similes are unusual and, at the same time, to the point. Aristotle also observes that by far the most important thing to a writer is to have this power of metaphor, for it is a gift which cannot be acquired, and it is a mark of genius. As regards reading, to require that a man shall retain everything he has ever read, is like asking him to carry about with him all he has ever eaten. The one kind of food has given him bodily, and the other mental, nourishment, and it is through these two means that he has grown to be what he is. The body assimilates only that which is like it, and so a man retains in his mind only that which interests him, in other words, that which suits his system of thought or his purposes in life. If a man wants to read good books, he must make a point of avoiding bad ones, for life is short and time and energy limited. Repetitio est mater studiorum. Any book that is at all important ought to be at once read through twice, partly because on a second reading the connection of the different portions of the book will be better understood, and the beginning comprehended only when the end is known, and partly because we are not in the same temper and disposition on both readings. On the second perusal we get a new view of every passage and a different impression of the whole book, which then appears in another light. A man's works are the quintessence of his mind, and even though he may possess very great capacity, they will always be incomparably more valuable than his conversation. Nay, in all essential matters his works will not only make up for the lack of personal intercourse with him, but they will far surpass it in solid advantages. The writings even of a man of moderate genius may be edifying, worth reading and instructive, because they are his quintessence, the result and fruit of all his thought and study, whilst conversation with him may be unsatisfactory. So it is that we can read books by men in whose company we find nothing to please, and that a high degree of culture leads us to seek entertainment almost wholly from books and not from men.